Welcome to the Scottish Watches podcast. This is the second show giving you coverage of Geneva Watch Days 2023. We're going to cram in as many releases, as many meetings, as many brands as potentially possible within the next hour. We'll try our best. Dave thinks we won't make it. Dave thinks we're going to have to do 3 shows for this. I don't agree. I think if we put our mind to it, Dave, we could actually accomplish great things here.
Great's maybe a bit excessive, but we can accomplish things if we put our minds to it. It's more accurate. But yes, let's see where we get to. But it might need to be fast and furious, a little bit like a machine gun. So let's get started, shall we?
Okay, let's get started. Let's avoid the wrist checks, because I'm wearing the same thing. Dave is probably not wearing anything whatsoever on his wrist.
Correct.
There we go. Naked. Perfect for the handcuffs for later. So let's get down and dirty with what happened over in Geneva. We already covered the getting there. We covered the Monday, the Tuesday, and we're into Wednesday. And the first meeting of the day was with somebody we met a couple of years ago over in Dubai, and that was David from Raketa, previous guest in the show. We have done a collaborative watch with himself and Pietro at limited edition. That was a Mars watch. Ill-fated because it came out around about the time special operations were happening, so we don't talk about that too much, but it was always nice to catch up with a friend no matter what the political backgrounds are in the country that he resides. He was showing us a couple of designs of different things that they're working on and explained that business is still good. Business still is the way it is for the normal people on the street, and they're busy selling watches across the world. They're actually still selling watches within the UK, but I believe he's told me that the tax levy is 35% in addition because of obviously those embargoes and things.
David himself is actually a British passport holder who happens to own Raketa. He's a European businessman that effectively saved Raketa, let's be honest. You know, he took it from a business that was beginning to fall apart and was nothing to it, and he's brought it all back together. So fair play to him. So whilst we have to be aware of what's going on in the world and we don't agree with it, as many people don't, that shouldn't mean that we dismiss good human beings that are in there, and David is definitely one of those.
Got to be careful what we say because we go on planes quite a bit. I'll leave that one with you. Anyway, we got to see some new releases that they have got coming out, some new pathways of existing models that are in the range, and it's just nice to speak to him because he's not Russian, as Dave said. And if you want to hear his backstory and how he decided on a whim to throw in his lawyer background, move across to Russia and take over the reins of a company 12 years ago that just was not doing well whatsoever, then we will link that in the show notes. So play along at home. If you listen to the audio podcast, click the link in your podcast player. It'll take you to our website, the specific page for this episode. You can see links, pictures, tech spec, all the details of the watches. And if you're watching the YouTube video, have a look in the description. There'll be a link straight there. So from Raketa, we decided to take a wander down to the main event. Now, if you've not been to Geneva Watch Days, although quite a few of you now have because we bumped into a few of you. Now, this event is not like your normal shows across the world. It's not like your Watches and Wonders or your Basel World of the past. Everything is centred around Lake Geneva, round the Beau Rivage Hotel, but there are little satellite hotels, and all these different brands have hotel room in a lobby, in a bar area. We decided to go across to the main marquee, which is also down at the lake. Fantastic location. We went in there because a couple of our friends were speaking.
So the guys from Moser and the guys from MB&F, so that being Edward and Max Busser, got together to announce their only watch candidate. It was absolutely pandemonium. And these guys had announced they were putting something in and they were working on it together, but this was the event where it was revealed in its glory, and it has to be said, glory is the correct word. This is one where, in my opinion, you can see that maybe Moser have taken the lead in the design, based around their Streamliner model, which is extremely popular. Not everyone loves it to death, but I have to say I think most folk really do admire the watch, with a little bit of that MB&F magic in there as well. And it's based around a little panda who is a DJ, and as he DJs, he is playing what become the gongs of this minute repeater, which is an absolutely outstanding little bit of fun play, I guess, on quite a serious complication of high horology, but an absolutely amazing looking watch. I'm not going to try and destroy it by describing it. Check out the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the pictures come up in front of you now. Absolutely outstanding watch, and I think we may have a little souvenir from that experience, shall we say?
Shall we say? Shall we said? James Bond.
Yeah, surely some mistake, small boy.
So it looks like we've got our little pandemonium guys out to play, Dave. Look at that.
We have our little pandemoniums, and they did a really cool little thing. So they had some larger versions of this model, and at the end they had these in a little bag, and you could pick one out of a bowl and one of them had a magic golden ticket in it. And if you received the magic golden ticket, you won the bigger version of the Panda. One of which, if I remember rightly, went into the auction later on that we will talk about further down this show.
That's correct. And this is obviously for Only Watch, which is just round the corner. Moser and MBNF have collaborated in the past. They decided, let's give it another shot. We did quite well this time. How are we going to up the ante? And everything about this watch is fantastic. Even the fact, right down to the minuscule levels of the engraving and the hand painting on this tiny little Panda that is, I think they said it was 5mm in size, this tiny little thing on the dial. And he's got the DJ turntables in front of him that are on top of the gongs. So when the gongs actually fire and rotate, the decks spin. I mean, everything was thought of. It's fantastic. Look in the show notes. Look on the website. There'll be lots of details and information. And obviously we got a chance to speak to the two gentlemen there later on.
We then went to visit Corum, who were slightly outside of the more normal venues. They had a kind of exhibition space, maybe 1 or 2 streets back from the Beau Rivage. And they had something that caught me certainly unawares. I think it caught Ricky unawares as well. They're well known for their bubble watches, for the Admirals and many other of these pieces that I'm sure you'll all have seen before. And they had some newer iterations of those which were quite interesting, especially the white ceramic, but their concept watch was something a little bit out of left field and not what I was expecting. So you were quite taken by this as well.
I was taken by the whole presentation because Corum, in my mind, was a brand to do with jewellery, high fashion and gems, and that is not right. I don't know where I got the idea from. It's completely wrong. And I had produced a video many years ago with Pietro again, because we've done so many collaborations in the past with the Corum Bubble. One of their first limited edition watches, perhaps even the first one that they did, was in collaboration. And that's what I went in looking at. But they had this concept watch Dave just mentioned, and it didn't look like a Corum. But then they showed us their history. They had their chief designer there, as well as the gentleman we were speaking to. And I think it's 55 years they've been going. They were one of the first brands to collaborate with a car company, Rolls-Royce, in the 70s. And they showed us a presentation with pictures of these watches that had come out. And this Rolls-Royce thing had the actual front radiator from one of the older Rolls-Royces. It goes all the way back. And there are so many standouts that don't look like each other. There is no design philosophy or family heritage between all the releases. And this new concept blew me away. Bit pricey. But when you compare it to Jacob & Co. or MBNF or those kind of guys, not crazy pricing, but still well out of my means.
And when we say crazy pricing, I mean, I guess that's a little bit disingenuous, as you can't actually buy this watch. Although they hinted that, although this was a concept piece not for sale, they may or may not have made 2 or 3, and if someone was a very keen collector of the brand, they may be persuaded to sell one. This was a grade 5 titanium watch with quite a architectural or sculptural kind of case. Not a flying tourbillon, a tourbillon, but not a flying tourbillon, but it gave that impression of being a flying tourbillon because they use quite a lot of sapphire in the watch, so sapphire bridges on there as well, and that gave this impression of it kind of floating or flying in midair. And certainly with this work with the sapphire in terms of the bridges, really cool. They did mention it was quite a challenge for the watchmakers to actually build this up, as just that little bit too much on the screwdriver and suddenly you have a shattered bridge.
You know, when they were explaining that to me, I was listening, and as I said, the designer sitting at the side, and he started to wince when they were talking about, oh yes, one turn too much with that jeweler's screwdriver and it's game over. And I was remembering all the heist movies when they're trying to drill through the safe, and if they go too far, they hit the glass and it cracks and game over.
It was a really interesting meeting. The guys were kind of quite free-flowing and talking about stuff, talking about what they've done, about where they might want to go, and really identifying this concept watch as a bit of a idea about where the brand plans to move forward with. So yeah, other than that, we saw a couple of other pieces. That white ceramic Admiral, that kind of took your attention a little bit because, as we've talked about in a few episodes, you've got a little thing floating about for a white ceramic watch, which has partially been itched, I think, but probably needs a bit more itching to get it out of your system.
The one that we're speaking about just now looked like it had been a collaborative piece with an artist. We've seen in the past Seven Friday doing stuff with this person and that person, and you can see a watch that is totally transformed. So I asked, I said, so who's the design guy, who's the graffiti guy that's involved in this? And this person we're speaking to, again, points to the watchmaker, who's not an old dude. He's probably well younger than both of us. And it was him. He did everything. He had the design of the watch, he had the design of the graffiti, the colour scheme, the layouts. Fantastic. opened my mind up and opened my eyes to what Quorum do and who they are. So I'm going to be doing a lot more investigative work on the brand, find out more about their heritage, and convince them to hopefully come on the show as well. This whole trip was about meeting people, finding out who had good stories and who we could actually drag onto the show to speak about them, because there's so many people we don't know about, or there's so many brands that we see but we don't understand the underlying story, and these guys have got heritage and history that goes way back, so looking forward to seeing what they do next.
Now we need to move along because we've got a lot to cover. The next watch, I think, in hindsight and in reflection,
did we have a blast?
It was a bit of a blast, and I think this was my favourite watch of the watches that were announced at this show that might be somewhat accessible. At least you can actually buy this one. The only watch, ain't ever going to be able to get near that one, full stop, and many of the others were either conceptual or concept watches. But this one, the Ulysses Nardin Blast Freewheel Marquetry. Now, it's a brand that I think both of us have got a real thing for, whether it's the freaks. And generally for me, it is the freak, and probably you as well, Ricky. When you kind of see it, you think, oh, it's such a cool watch, and it surely is. But you know, Ulysses Nardin are one of the pioneers of silicon technology, if arguably not the pioneer of silicon technology, really from back in the kind of early 2000s up to 2015, where they introduced a lot of technologies before everybody else. But in this one, they're doing something in the Blast that they have done in the Freak, but this is the first time they've done it in the Blast, which is utilising silicon in a decorative manner as well as a technical manner. So all of your escapements and springs and anchors and all of these parts that you want in silicon, they've done that already. But in this watch, they're now using very, very slender silicon tiles to decorate the watch in this kind of marquetry fashion. And I think this watch was just stunning. It was futuristic, it was cool, it was wearable, it was a great colour, this kind of iridescent-y, bluey, purple colour. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. Didn't love the price so much, but I can see why it would be the price it is. I think something in the region, if I remember rightly, 140,000 Swiss, something like that. So certainly not inexpensive, but this was a pretty cool watch.
Can't really add much to that. It was great to sit down and see these watches in sunlight, because we're in the UN boutique. There are many boutiques around about Lake Geneva. Breitling have one, tons and tons of different brands, especially when you go across the lake, across the bridge to the other side. You've got Richard Mille, you've got Montblanc, you've got the Rolex store. So we got to do this all in the UN place, which meant they were comfortable, they had everything to hand, they had all the posters up showing the intricacies of the design, the manufacture. And the gentleman took us through the concepts, how it was all put together. And the best thing about these shows is you get handed the watch. So we were able to actually try it in the wrist, have a look at it, see how it felt, see how all the different parts interacted with each other. And again, it's one of those watches that I thought they had just superglued little bits and pieces on, because I could not understand or fathom how all the parts worked together to tell the time. But it did. And as Dave says, they've utilised, it looked like shiny blue metallic foil. That's the way they'd utilised the silicon.
So then we dropped off at our friends Maurice Lacroix to have a good look at what they were offering. Unfortunately, we got to see a lot, but unfortunately, we're slightly early and we can't come out of the blocks too quickly because a few of them are still under embargo. We then went to see our friends at Arnold & Son and Angelus, two brands that I quite like. I've definitely got a thing for Arnold & Son, but Ricky, I think, is beginning to get more and more down the rabbit hole of both of those brands. So you can talk about these ones.
Well, it's been a year since I was first introduced to the brand, and it was through Stephen at Remontoire 68. He did the intros last Geneva Watch Days, and we started a conversation that eventually led to having their CEO on the show a number of months ago. I think it was just before or just after Watches and Wonders this year. And I got to see all the amazing watches last year for the first time, and this year we got to see new iterations and new models. And obviously Simona was with us, and she had never seen these watches in real life. And this was another one of those brands that she came in, she sat down, the tray of watches came out, they do the unveiling thing, even though we've seen some of the press releases, and they peel back the cover, and the first watch comes out, and her eyes lit up multiple times, not just with the bejeweled ones that were sparkling away in the sunlight, but multiple watches that they had. The watches, the releases, the colour schemes. Then you get to the price point. And we said this about Jacob & Co, that we didn't expect the watch we spoke about to be in the high 50s. Arnold & Son watches, Angelus watches, they command a price that does not reflect the quality that you get. You get so much bang for buck with these watches, it is unbelievable. And the presentation from the company is always second to none. They're fantastic. check them out. And the location that they use as well, it's so relaxed, it's so easy to go in, sit down. They even had a rechargeable LED light so we could see everything in minute detail. I wish other brands did that as well.
For me, the light blue colour that Angelus were using in this new dial was really good. Really, really good. We saw actually a few different brands beginning to use this very light, I don't even know how you describe it, but it's a very light blue, not French blue, even lighter than that, but not into these kind of iridescent colours. Really quite cool. Really liked it from them. The new Platinum Case Perpetual Moon from Arnold & Son. That is just a watch that I have a real soft spot in my heart, and this new version does all the justice that it deserves with the little loomed moon on there.
Then, since we were in the building, which was the Fairmont Hotel, we were coming back the way and we spotted a brand we were going to see later, and beside them we spotted a brand that we actually hadn't booked an appointment with, but we're Scottish, we gate crash things, so we just stormed straight in to Singer. And we said, listen, we don't have an appointment, but we're here anyway. You don't look too busy. Can we have a look around? And they were brilliant. They showcased all the new models, including a watch where you can time your coffee. So it goes through the different stages of how long it takes to produce this type of coffee, that type of coffee, this type of coffee. And they showed us like the track, they showed us limited edition releases, the different colorways, the way that they've created watches to emulate the look of different vehicles within the Singer range. And then Marco appeared out of nowhere. The guy that designs the watch is the actual creator behind the brand. And again, he spent another 10-15 minutes with us going through things. He remembered us from Dubai Watch Week. We obviously asked if he was going again this year so we could catch up with him with a proper appointment. He said he would. And it was just fantastic to see all the watches spread around the room where you could walk as if they were museum exhibits, but you could actually pick the watches up, try them on, rotate them, figure out how the complications work. Because with Singer, it isn't as easy as it looks, but once you get the idea of how it works, it becomes second nature.
Both of us have a bit of a soft spot for this brand. A little bit left of centre when it comes to aesthetic, and even when it comes to time telling, because very much in most of these, the chronograph function is the primary and the central feature of the watch, with the ability to tell the time being there, but being almost secondary to the chronograph, which is kind of flipping the whole concept on its head, where obviously typically time is the main feature and the chronograph is a secondary feature. But the coffee timer is a great little watch which allows you to press a button to hold the chrono at 0 and you release it and it begins to run, and then they've segmented on the dial areas of runtime for your coffee to get the perfect ristretto or espresso or whatever you decide to have. So that was really cool. Also with that kind of brown tobacco colour, so the kind of coffee-esque colours on there as well. And then a similar but different version for stir time for some of your cocktails as well. So yeah, really, really nicely done. Beautiful movements, beautiful case finishing in these watches. A little bit left of centre, so if you like something different, absolutely check these guys out.
And speaking of cocktails, that was it for the day. It was time to prepare for the nighttime festivities. And there was a watch auction happening that night. And it wasn't just a normal watch auction. It wasn't even like one of our watch auctions. They actually had Aurel Bax from Philips in association with the guys at the event doing a charity watch auction. It seems to be all the rage at the moment, funnily enough. But that was the first time I'd ever been in a room where an actual watch auction was happening. And am I right in thinking that is the guy that had the hammer on the Paul Newman Daytona from a number of years ago?
Yes, I believe it very much was. He is a bit of a star when it comes to those very high profile auctions, and he was comparing and being the auctioneer for an auction that didn't involve any watches, but the watch companies were allowed to donate an experience or something unusual that wasn't a watch, and all of the funds that were raised went to the Geneva School of Watchmaking to help to support any potential candidates or students there who maybe didn't have the financial means to complete their studies or to start their studies. So all going to a good cause in the kind of future of watchmaking within the Geneva area. And it was good fun to watch that. A few of the lots got quite heated, and the three of us had a really good vantage point as we were right at the front. Much by mistake, to be honest, because I think we just kind of wandered there as the auction began to kick off, and we ended up in the front row watching all the action. So great fun to watch, and a great amount of money raised for that cause.
There was also a fantastic band with live singers just beforehand. I think that's the reason we ended up at the front, because Simona was drawn to the live music, and then suddenly it was a watch auction, and we heard bids coming in from all across the room. All familiar faces were there. Max Busser was there, Chaikin was there, all these folks. And then we kept hearing bids from behind us, and we turned round to see the winning bidder was actually George Kern, CEO of Breitling. Everybody was getting together, everybody was getting behind things, even mortal enemies within the watch sphere. Because we've said this before, in the watch community, the watch industry, there aren't really enemies. Everyone kinda gets on behind the scenes, and it was fantastic to see everybody getting together. Unfortunately, the following morning, we did come a cropper to a hangover, and that was when we actually headed out for our first meeting, 9 AM, on the water, on a boat with Armin Strom on choppy waters.
This was the one that was vying for first place for me alongside the Ulysse Nardan, but I think the Ulysse Nardan has just pipped it as my favourite, but this one is a very, very strong second contender for favourite release of the show. This is the Armin Strom 1 week first edition, a release of only 25 pieces. Again, as we mentioned before, in this lighter blue colour palette that seems to be getting quite popular as well, that being a good thing for me. A few firsts in this watch. They have updated the movement, some new finishing, some new areas of kind of machining and almost skeletonizing in this as well. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he said that this was the first Armin Strom that actually has the time-telling hands mounted centrally as well. Great looking watch. I've got a lot of time for Armin Strom. The guys do, again, not quite mainstream in terms of aesthetic, but are really cool. The minute you see it, you know it's an Armin Strom.
They've been on the show twice before. We gate crashed, because that's what we do. We gate crashed their facilities when we were over in Beale last year visiting the Raj, and the hotel we were staying in was literally across the road. You crossed and you were there. And we went in unannounced, went through the place. They actually remembered that because they pulled us up for it and said book an appointment next time. But seeing the new iterations, plus all the new stuff, the new release they had out where they'd come up with a new complication to display the date, everything was there. It was all in a watch box. We got to look through the past, the present, and a little bit into the future, because some of the things they showed us are coming down the line. But we were quite happy to get off that boat, go back to dry land, firmer footing. Simona had a nasty hangover. I was close behind. Dave was fine, because you know what he's like. But then we moved on to perhaps one of my favourite watches, and that was just along the road at Bulgari. They were inside one of the hotels, and they had it kitted out like a museum. They had everything, the Serpenti, they had all the classics, high horology pieces, high jewellery pieces, and the one that got me was the carbon and rose gold. I thought it was stunning.
It absolutely was, I agree. It's absolutely stunning, but it's still that watch that loves to tease me from afar of, it doesn't quite fit your wrist, David. But hey, it is what it is. This carbon black gold, I think it was called, which is a carbon watch, super great looking, kind of very stealthy carbon case, but with the appliques and the hands and the back of the movement in rose gold. It looks great. Those colours, black and gold are two colours that really do work harmoniously together. Two versions. One, much more simple, your automatic version with the micro rotor movement, just time telling, and a much more involved perpetual calendar variation of it as well, which, for the fact that it's a perpetual calendar, is only markedly thicker in an already extremely thin watch. Great looking watches, love them to death. I've talked so many times about the Octafinissimos and the fact that I desperately want one, but I just can't because it doesn't wear. I even got to prove the point by actually trying it on and being like, no, it still doesn't work. So sad to say, but this is a watch that might be in Ricky's future if he ever decides to go a bit left field.
It's 30 years since Bulgari first did their carbon gold watch for the first time, and I've seen the history unfold in front of me every time we've met the brand, because as I say, in the corner of your eye, you're seeing the museum pieces they've got that lead up to today. So yeah, that one is stunning. I don't know if in the market to buy a watch this year of that price point, because I have other things in the agenda, but it is great. And if we can possibly get one in for a bit of a test, I would love to parade it around, because again, it's a kind of a stealthy brand. It's never going to be pinched from your wrist. Actually, today we saw a news report that the BBC were recording something out in London, and in the background they accidentally filmed a watch robbery in progress. So again, it shows you that craziness is all over the world, but that comes down to the big numbers from Rolex and Patek. Something like this, fantastic, flies under the radar, looks great on the wrist, if it will actually fit your wrist. And in Dave's unfortunate circumstances, that is not meant to be.
Not meant to be for me. But from there, where we saw some amazing watches and also got some hands-on with a couple of their ultra-high jewellery pieces and a couple of their aluminium Bulgaris, especially the tennis edition, which we talked about in a previous show, but have never seen it in real life. We got to have a play with that. Great. Love seeing Bulgari every time because they've just got some cool stuff, from very affordable to the opposite end of the scale, shall we say.
And another brand that is accessible that we knew nothing about, but again, Stephen at Remontoire 68 grabbed a hold of us when we were heading back to the main hotel to introduce us to a brand that I saw briefly a year ago. Never got to try the watches on for any great length of time, and then didn't really hear much about. And that brand is Maroon Mussy. Probably mispronouncing the hell out of it, but we got to see their watches, and their party piece, their little trick, is that their watches don't appear to use the normal water resistance methods. They have utilised a multi-stage, I think it was 35 stage case design, where everything links and locks together to make it waterproof, water resistant, without the usual gaskets and things. So you're more technically minded when it comes to that side of stuff. Explain all.
So I'll explain it probably badly, but we had a discussion about it, and it effectively uses tension and compression technology. So it's been designed in a way that when it bolts together, it effectively pulls into a tighter sphere. So as you mentioned, they have managed to do away with all of the rubber gaskets and seals, but still confidently give it a solid waterproof or water resistant rating. Pretty cool technology, and the fact they've managed to do away with gaskets means that there's potentially much less areas or points of failure when it comes to taking your watch into the pool.
Indeed. So another brand hopefully we can involve in the show through Stephen, because he has opened the doors with many other places across the last year, so we owe him a great deal of gratitude there. Moving on to Hotlands, and that is the kind of sister brand to Moser. They're known for their TV-shaped watches. We have covered them in the past with various things. A year ago, we caught up with James Thompson, Black Badger, because he was working on something behind the scenes. Then, this year, we didn't see him. He didn't pop up everywhere. Don't even know he was there. But we did get to see the latest iteration of their watches, and they had a 3D larger model. Not to scale, completely unto scale, but it showed the way the concept worked and the way the inner mechanisms actually rotated and displayed the time.
We visited Hotlands earlier in the year at Watches and Wonders, where they were actually showing not Moser this year, so they decided to give Hotlands kind of free reign at the show, and they had that television, I guess full-size television ultimately, which had the innards all removed, and they had built a working clock to replicate how the wristwatch works into the television, and they had that again there. I think certain people in that room were rather taken by that television. It was probably more interesting, to be honest, than what's on most televisions, but looking at the watches, those jumping hour functions, the retrograde functions, this, unique to a certain extent case shape, not really thinking of any other brands that use something as pronounced as that. Titanium cases, lots of sapphire work. I like these. I think Simona wasn't sure how wearable it was going to be, but even she, when she put it on her wrist, she felt it was a little too big for her wrist, albeit she's got a very small wrist. But when I put it on, it wore so well. So yeah, not for everybody again, but it's always good that you get brands that do these really unusual things.
And speaking of brands that do unusual things, where do you think we went next? For work. Yes, we got to see the latest and greatest creations from those guys, Felix & Co. And again, it was in a great setting. It was very juxtaposition towards what we actually saw on people's wrists versus what we saw with the marble flooring. But they had the Parky, I don't know what the name of it's called, but I call it the Parky-meter watch. And it was a simpler, harking back to the early days of our work, way of displaying time. And the way they explained how the system worked, it made a lot of sense. You'll see it in the pictures in the show notes. Then in a completely different side of the scale, they had a Wandering Hours version of their watch with lots of diamonds on it.
Absolutely. We saw that Pavé watch, which was, again, not what I was expecting. You get that sci-fi kind of vibe generally out of our work. And when you saw a watch that was bejeweled, absolutely not my thing as a general rule. Don't do bejeweled watches, not my vibe. I love to see high jewellery pieces, but not my thing. This one, on the other hand, kind of worked because it didn't really look like a bejeweled watch, but those guys always doing the crazy stuff. We'll see these guys again when we get to Dubai Watch Week later in the year.
Yep, all our firm favourites will be across there, as will we. Looking forward to that one. That's the next big thing on the agenda. Next, we went to see Moser. We jumped around the hotel, ended up seeing Ed and the team there. They didn't have anything to show us, apart from the pandemonium stuff, but the watch wasn't actually with them. It was already doing a tour for photography and going around the world with the Only Watch crew. We did chat a little bit about the Moser history. Simona got an education about how things came to be, how actually back in the day, Moser helped IWC get off the ground. And up until recently, that was actually featured on the IWC website. Doesn't appear to be there anymore, funnily enough, but hey, that's how things go. So we've already spoken about Moser, MB&F, time to talk about other stuff.
So we then moved on to the final day of the show, that being the Friday, and we started off that day with a brand that is pretty much a fan favourite, that being De Bethune, and they had a new smaller watch. I love them. I think most folk love them. It's one of these brands that sits in that kind of little plane where most folk have never even seen one, but when you get to handle it and you get to play with it and you get to put it on your wrist, they blow you away. Those colours seem so outlandish and far away, but it is remarkably wearable. I think both of us were taken especially by that whole spring-loaded mechanism when it comes to the lugs. So both the smaller size being very wearable by most people and the larger sizes, certainly I would carry it off quite happily. I'd be more than happy to wear it. Both of us got to try them on and stand in the glorious sunshine. They had a nice kind of balcony there that we could stand out. We also had a very nice smoothie there as well.
It was a little bit punchy because it had ginger in it, but it certainly woke us up because that was another of the 9 a.m. appointments at the beginning of the day. The presentation was great. Seeing the watches, again, it doesn't matter how many times you see a De Bethune, you will always appreciate them because the way they get the colours and the hues of blue, it's not a painting treatment, it's not a deposition, it's not CVD or PVD. The way they do it is they heat treat the titanium, a little bit like blued hands, but with titanium it's so difficult to get a uniform colour, but they manage it.
From there, we went up the stairs and we went to see MB&F, talking of mad watches. And as we walked in there, we met with the guys who never fail to recognise you, remember your name, and make you feel super welcome. And we sat down and began to look at some of the pieces that, again, you will very rarely see.
You never know who you're going to meet in there. It could be any of the team, but it was Harris that actually spoke to us. He sat us down and he has got one of the best voices in the watch industry. If we're going to have Max on the show again, we should definitely drag him on because it's just soothing. And he explained something that is massively complex in such an easy to listen to way that it makes sense. And again, Simona was with us, first time coming to an event, and she was just mesmerised by the storytelling, the way that things were created. And it wasn't just the pandemonium watch that we spoke about, because that had already been done to death a little bit between all the different places we'd been. He was talking about the sequential Evo, different variations, Mad Gallery, everything and anything that MB&F have been up to in the last year or two, we discussed. And that chronograph that he was showing us, you can time a race in this car and that car, or you can time your eggs and your something else in the kitchen. It all made complete sense. And before we left, we got to see in person the driver's watch with a digital display, not an electronic digital, but a mechanical digital. Sapphire cased on the top. Like the Mad one, it's got a rotor on the top as well in a different colour. This time it is an emerald metallic green with a white velcro rubber strap. Sounds bad when you try and describe it in words, but when you see it, when you wear it, when you put it on, it's absolutely fantastic. And again, this is another watch that Simona had no interest in until she sat down, saw it, placed it on the wrist, and then it was a bit of a fight to get it off the Eastern European.
This was the HM8 Mark II, and the white version with the, I don't know what we would call it, khaki green or light khaki green strap. David was vibing the clothing to be wearing that watch, because when he put it on, he felt like it had come home to roost. Unfortunately, it couldn't follow him out of the room, but he thought long and hard about how quickly he could run.
And that's the only long and hard that Dave has in his life at the moment. On to another firm favourite. Do you like that firm? long, hard firm. On to another firm favourite with the guys at Grubel Forze. And this is where Dave has the upper hand because he knows about this brand. He's met them a number of times. And this was one of the first meetings where we wandered in and the guest and the host kind of just collided as if they were long lost friends. You spoke with the team there, then obviously me and Simona sat down waiting patiently for Dave to stop caressing the new releases so we could see them too.
No, absolutely. And it was all about the black carbon editions that they have released. We had a great chat with them about the kind of future direction of the brand. Not that it's hugely different to where they are now, but they are bringing out a few more, dare I say, affordable pieces, that being affordable in the grand scale of Grubel Forze, but slightly simpler functional watches, still retaining all of the finishing and the quality of finishing that you would expect from Grubel Forze, but being a simpler complication watch in terms of time only, as opposed to all of these insane 30-degree flying tourbillon watches that we know and love from these guys and their GMT World Travelers, all of these things which are amazing but unfortunately come with a more than punchy price tag. Deserving of it has to be said, because when they start to talk about the amount of work, time and hands-on that these watches take to make, you begin to understand how it works. Whereas they're now going to have some lower priced for them watches that will be introduced, but these black carbons were unbelievably they're just special looking watches. Big and bulky in the hand, the minute you put in your wrist, it just finds itself at home.
Couldn't agree more. It's a very nice brand. The releases this year, not my favourite. I preferred the ones from last year, the blue ones, the GMTs, the little spinning globes, but they did tell us some secrets that we probably shouldn't tell you, but we're going anyway. They're busy upgrading their facilities to a place that is almost 3 times the size. So things are on the up and up for Grubel Forze, and it is fantastic to hear because their watches, yes, they are expensive, but they demand that price for the amount of level of intricacy and the workmanship that goes in, the polishing, the hand finishing, the amount of hours, days and weeks that go into the bridge work, the main plates, all the different parts to make them immaculate. There is not a speck of dust. Everything is mirror finish under loop. I can't say enough good things about the brand. Check the show notes, lots of pictures in there, lots of details. Then we went across to see the guys at Gerald Charles, and this is a brand that we've been working with behind the scenes. We've got a plan to do a show with them. We recorded some footage while we were across in Geneva. We need a couple of additional things, and this is the brand that Gerald Genta produced once he had sold his own name and his own brand onto another company. He got a little bit, how would you say, itchy feet, decided he wanted to get back into watches, but he couldn't use his own name. It's a little bit like Peter Speak Marine can't use his own name, he has to use the Naked Watchmaker. Gerald Genta used his middle name, Charles, and started another brand. So there'll be more details on that coming soon, but the watches that they have got, again, are fantastic, so well executed and finished, and when you look at the price point versus what you get on the wrist, it's just unbelievable. So details on that coming soon, but look in the show notes and you'll see some pictures.
Then we went to meet somebody that Simona had been itching to meet the entire time she was there. Who might that have been, Ricky?
We got to meet Konstantin Chaikin in real life for, I think it was the 3rd time for me, probably the 100th time for you. And the thing that got me the most was, compared to 2 years ago at Dubai Watch Week, this time around, he could speak English.
It has to be said, he's not exactly fluent, albeit significantly more fluent in English than we are in Russian, it has to be said. But yep, he was there, engaging against the odds, it has to be said. He is, as a business, suffering from some of the sanctions, etc., that have been put in, the same as we discussed when it came to Raketa. But he's there. Lots of the collaborations that he's worked on previously have now been removed due to a lot of those issues as well, but he had a new release from us, this one based on a old fairy story tale, children's story from the historical past of Russia, and even from, I think, the greater kind of area as well, as Simona was well aware. I think she even said that her grandpa used to tell her a story of this ilk as well. And this watch is called Koloblock watch, which is based on a character from a Russian fairy tale, and very much in the kind of mode of the Rismonds, what you would expect. It's got those eyes like the Joker, so it tells the time in the same way. But it had 2 complications down where the mouth is. Rather than just moon phase, it had a moon phase, but also had a day of the week indicator on there as well. If you love wristmonds, you'll probably love this. If you hate wristmonds, you definitely aren't going to like it. But for me, it's a win. I'm a wristmonds guy, so I'm not ever going to complain about them. They also had a few other pieces from the wristmonds collection. They had a Minion watch there. They also had a couple of the other pieces that have long sold out, but had some of the prototypes there as well. And he also gave us a really good kind of presentation on the watch they've submitted this year for Only Watch, which is arguably one of the pieces with the, I think in fact this year it's definitely got more complications than anything else within the auction. And there's probably not many more watches out in the wild with more complications packed into one wristwatch.
It's funny listening to him speak and watching how he operates at events and shows like this. I get the impression he would rather not be there. He would rather be working at the desk in the workshop with a lathe, with a loop. Because it was just a case of when he turned up at the events at night, he walked in, looked around, showed face, and walked straight back out again. And when he was speaking to us about things, I got the impression he wanted to maybe talk more about the high complications, the clocks that he's produced, the watches that have got more stuff in them, instead of just, there's the guy that makes the Joker watches, which I think is probably, as I said before, it's when you've got that one hit, but you've got albums of other great material, but people always want to hear that one song.
He's much more than a one-trick pony when it comes to watches or high complication carriage clocks. The Computus, just out of this world when it comes to kind of complications. Arguably blows the wristwatches out of the water when it comes to how complicated it is, but also he's done the Mars timers, he's got some mystery dials, invisible dials, lots of other things to his kind of repertoire of watches than just these wristmonds. But as you mentioned, the wristmonds are the ones that get the kind of limelight, the notoriety and the headlines.
Next, we caught up with a brand that was over in the main marquee. It was a little bit of guerrilla marketing in their front, although they actually had been invited to speak as guests on a panel, so they hadn't completely snuck in the back door and gate crashed the thing. And I can't pronounce the name, but it's Hollenritz or something like that. They're the guys that create the 3D printed titanium watches. We've featured them on the show before. We have them on our Instagram and the website. And what they're doing is just mind-blowing. Instead of creating things with layers as you would do a multi-part case, they 3D print it. So they have complete control over where all the little parts go, the negative space. It's like watching a Formula 1 car being built when they actually show you the behind the scenes stuff on that. And the pricing is not that crazy when you compare it to other watchmakers. So this was the first time you've probably seen these in real life, as did I. What were your thoughts on them?
Really impressed by the fact these guys are using a different technology to enable them to come up with the shapes they want. Obviously, they talked a lot about architecture and a background in that kind of area and an enjoyment of architecture and trying to utilize that into the design of this watch. I think the guys have got, a tough road ahead of them because they're so early on in the kind of abilities of this technology. But from what we saw, some really impressive pieces they put out there. Dials, really cool as well. And their kind of work in progress, which is their 3D printed titanium bracelet. Looks like if they can get that over the line, that will be something to behold.
Reminds me of H.R. Giger, the guy that does all the alien work, the way that the structures work. It reminds me a little bit of your Streamliner, the way you've got the armadillo articulating links on the bracelet. They take it to the nth degree because, again, they're printing in the space that they want material to be. They don't have to worry about the fact that it's cast or it's forged. It's just a completely different way of watchmaking. And the watches, therefore, are super lightweight. The heaviest part of the watches, obviously, being the movements or the sapphire crystal on the front. So looking forward to seeing what they produce next. They have got lots of iterations, lots of designs on the board, and they said they're going to be sending some information towards the end of the year about what they will be up to come 2024.
After that, we headed back over to the Beau Rivage to meet the guys at Reservoir, a brand that we've talked a little bit about in the show. Obviously very well known for a couple of features that make them a little bit different. This is a brand that you, Ricky, have a little bit of a thing for.
It's a relatively new brand, founded maybe 6 years ago, 2017 I think it was, just about the time I got into watches myself. And we featured them in the show because they've produced watches where the dials look like cockpit instruments. That could be from a plane, a race car or a road car. I got a loan of one of their Porsche watches, which obviously they don't use the name Porsche for obvious reasons, but that was the Caniston, I believe, and we got to see that plus a whole new range of watches, one that looks like a VU meter because it's got retrograde functions on both sides, and they had a black version of this that was absolutely stunning. So again, show notes will be your friend when we're talking about these kind of things, and we were going to be hopefully recording a show there and then with them, but due to the fact the hustle and bustle and the noise within the hotel and the amount of people coming in to speak to them and look at the watches, it was just not feasible. So we're going to record that one remotely, which is probably better because we can do it in a relaxed atmosphere, not worrying about time and other people going to be appearing later on, but to chat with the folks there, to see the watches stripped back without the dial, so you can see the mechanism and the way that their retrograde flick back along with their jumping hours and their power reserve looking like a fuel gauge. Fantastic watches, and price point wise, around about £4,000, £5,000, €5,000. Insane value for money for a really cool looking watch. So stay tuned for more information on when that show's going to appear. Now we're into the closing stages of stuff, and did we keep the best to last? You can decide. We got to see the folks at Resonance, a brand that Justin Haas spoke about when he was on the show recently. He's actually writing the book on the brand, and we got to experience not only the new releases but the historic ones, including a bit of a hybrid monster, I would call it. It's where the Borg infiltrate the Enterprise and they start to take over people. And this is a watch that is a couple of years old. It's got a PCB, it's got a power mechanism, it's got motors inside it, but it's also got a mechanical movement. That was the older one, but they've also got a new iteration that is oil-filled. It looks incredible. Again, unearthly. If you don't have the inside opened up, you can't really tell what's going on and how it functions. But the guys had all the bits and pieces there on the table. Me and Dave and Simona got to experience it and got an explanation from the guy that invented the technology.
Only thing, unfortunately, we weren't allowed to do was to take some photographs or videos of the actual exploded watch, because obviously there's a lot of proprietary technology in there. But got to see some amazing watches from these guys. For the amount of technology packed into it, it is a beautifully smooth, simple looking watch when you actually get it in your hands, and it has that huge amount of technology packed into there. Whether it's the one with the kind of, I think they call it, is it a digital crown or a smart crown where you can tap it and it wakes up? I love these watches, so cool. And the eucalyptus green, which is the new colour palette that they had there as well, very much along my lines of what I like. I love a bit of green, I do. Really cool. I think that one was the Type 3 in eucalyptus green. That was, I think, their new piece that they were announcing at the show, but they had all of their other pieces there. And also the Diver, which is a piece that you don't see that frequently from them, with the locking bezel and such like. Really great. Love these guys. If you've never seen one, check out the show notes, and if you ever get a chance to have a play with one, you'll come away with a smile on your face.
I now know how it all works, and it still appears like magic, and that is the best type of watchmaking. It's where you've got something that is functional, it tells the time, but it's a talking piece. And even when you try and explain it to someone, like my Mad One Red, when I explain how that works and I show them and the penny drops and they figure it out, you move on to the next thing. With Resonance, the magic remains. You're shown how the trick works, and it is still incredible. So great things from those guys. Looking forward to seeing Justin's book, because if his previous books are anything to go by, this one will be an absolute cracker as well. Hopefully out soon so we can get it for Christmas. But that was kind of the end of the show. We finished things up. There was an event at night. It was Mexican themed. There was sombrero hats lying around. Lots of fun was had. Dave had to head off Friday night. Me and Simona stayed until Saturday night, but during the day on Saturday, we just went a wander around Geneva. It was the public day, so we saw lots of folks congregating around the Geneva Watch Days marquee. We popped our head in, saw folks having a great time, experiencing the watches, the live panel discussions, getting involved in things, which was good to see, and it's something we promote on the show all the time. Doesn't matter if it's Red Bar Global, doesn't matter if it's Dubai Watch Week, Watches and Wonders Public Days, or Geneva Watch Days. If you're an enthusiast and you can afford the time and the expense to get there, do so. If you're travelling from the UK, super easy. Travel out in the morning, do the show, get a train back to PAL Expo, jump in a plane back to UK, you've done it in a day. It's easier than getting to London from Scotland. So fully recommend it. But we went a wander round, and there was a couple of things happened on the Saturday. As me and Simone are walking down one of the main streets, we were actually stopped dead, and it wasn't to be mugged for my watch, even though I was wearing my Daytona because I felt safe being Geneva. This was a listener to the show called Peter, And he explained that, he's been listening for years and years, loves the show, and he's a massive Doxa fan. So he was heading to see the folks at Doxa at the show. Great to meet him. We got a wrist check, and he actually followed up with an email later on. So fantastic hearing from you, Peter, and looking forward to seeing you again at different events. From there, we went a wander around all the different places, came across a boutique that specialised in pre-loved items, but it was from the first owner. So we went in there, they had a whole load of watches, they had a whole load of jewellery, they had a KLF 12-inch vinyl record in the window, so I knew that I was home. So I went in there, spoke to the owner, and he was wearing an incredible watch from a brand we spoke about on the show a number of months ago there, and that's Arcia. They had the fantastic sapphire bezeled, hombre kind of blue to white dialed watch that me and Dave gushed about. Well, he was wearing a version of one of their designs, and it was amazing. The name of the place is called Downtown Uptown Geneva, and his name is Christophe. So big shout out to him for spending a bit of time with us both, explaining about his store. He's been running it with his wife for a number of years, and the fact that he knows the creators of these watches, and he's going to put in a good word and see if we can get them on the show.
Fantastic. So yeah, Geneva's always worthy of a bit of a wander round. Usually when you're there, you might be there for a purpose, for a show or whatever. If you ever get the luxury of a bit of time to wander around, there's some great things to be found in Geneva.
So there is our experiences of 2023's Geneva Watch Days. It felt like we did a lot less, but when we recount it and go through our notes and through our pictures and videos, so much was crammed in, even though it was an enjoyable, massively enjoyable experience and felt super laid back versus other shows that are a little bit more corporate in nature. I'm definitely looking forward to going back next year. I'm definitely looking forward to Dubai Watch Week in a couple of months' time. And yeah, the sky is the limit. So great to meet like-minded individuals, collectors, enthusiasts, media folk, other people that do podcasts, YouTube, websites. Spent a great deal of time with the folks from Worn and Wound. We're going to do some collaborative work back and forward because we've been trying to do this for a couple of years, never had the opportunity. The sky is the limit, and we're just super grateful that there are these events happening, especially after the pandemic.
Always great to meet up with everybody as well.
That is the end of our show. That is the end of our coverage. We managed to cram it into 2 shows. Dave thought it would be 3. Thank you for joining us on our journey to Geneva. It has been incredible. We loved every minute of it, apart from the sunburn that I got in the last day. Thanks, Simona, for that one. Yeah, just check the show notes, check the website, follow us on Instagram. You'll see little reels, little clips, and obviously the YouTube video version of the podcast will come out when I can be bothered afterwards. It will be a mammoth edit, tons of video footage, tons of things. Miziel hopefully sends me the right sized file so I don't have to kick his arse. But that is it. That's the end of our show. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys again soon.